Dragonflight Season 1 introduces a new set of dungeons, and all roles will probably have new best-in-slot races. Also, if you want to know what Bobby Kotick, the CEO of Activision Blizzard, might have to do with it, you have to stick with me here for a little bit. I have ranked all races that don't directly interfere with a mob in the F tier for this tier list, since they shine more on the DPS front, which is not being discussed in this video. Just to be very clear, this is not a tier list for ranking damage. This tier list only takes utility into consideration. If you want to squeeze out every little DPS for a raid setting, you might want to sim your character yourself. Let's start with the Kul Tiran. They have a 3-second stun on a 2.5 minute cooldown with a bit of damage attached to it, but the obvious debuff of looking like this. Also, it's a stun, and we have a lot of stuns in the game, but a solid B tier for the Kul Tirans. Next up, we have the Nightborne. At least Nightborne have something, right? It's barely anything though. Arcane Pulse looks like a mage's Arcane Explosion and deals a very small amount of damage and slows enemies by 50% on a 3-minute cooldown. Not really worth considering, but still something that affects mobs, so I had to include it in the D tier. Mechagnomes. If you remember the kiting meta in Shadowlands Season 1, where placing a target dummy that came from engineering was completely overpowered and had to be nerfed or kind of removed during the season, you will remember how important that item was. Mechagnomes still provide the ability to do just that with their racial ability Hyper Organic Light Originator, or in short, Holo, in a weaker version. Holo spawns 2 copies of you that have slightly more aggro than you and have 10% of your max HP. Might be a consideration for tanks, especially if kiting will become the meta again somehow. But let's all hope that won't be the case, since it felt horrible to play in higher keys for all roles due to the mobs running out of every ground effect and tanks getting one-shot if they get too close. Again here the same obvious debuff of looking like this. All in all, a C tier for the Mechagnomes due to being helpful in very niche situations. Tauren. Both Tauren Races have an AoE stun for 1.5 and 2 seconds on a 2-minute and 1.5 minute cooldown. This makes them an extremely strong pick for M+. Very solid A tier, might even be pumped up to S tier for some classes without AoE stuns. Nightelf. The obvious selling point of Nightelf is Shadow Melt. But Shadow Melt is only incredibly strong when at least 3 out of 5 players in the group are running Nightelf, which, looking at the current top performing specs, might still be the case for organized play in high-end Mythic+. Nightelf could very easily become S tier if you are playing in an almost all Nightelf and coordinated group for some dungeons where a lot of skips in a short time frame are required. Although situations where a Shadow Melt skip is more beneficial than the new Invispot will be reserved for the highest of keys or some incredibly smart MDI skips, so it will probably not be very relevant for the general public. That's why I'm putting them in C tier for 99.9% of dungeon runs at the moment, but they will for sure have their 1 or 2 dungeons where they will shine during very high keys or MDI. Pandaren. Quaking Palm is an in-cap ratio that doesn't DR with stuns or disorients because in-cap is their own diminishing returns category like Scattershot, Sheep or Gouge. That ratio has a 2-minute cooldown and is great to stop a high-value cast, but the only problem with it is that it's a single-target ability. But of course still infinitely better than stuff like Orc's Blood Fury or Troll's Berserking when it comes to stopping important casts. That's why it's a solid B tier together with the Kul Tiran, since their racial abilities are quite similar. The Pandaren one is a bit better though because it's an in-cap and therefore doesn't DR stuns. Dracthyr. Extremely strong in M+, with an AoE stun and an AoE knockback on top. I'm curious when and if at all Blizzard will lift the restriction of Dracthyr only being able to be Evoker. These ratios on melees especially would be extremely helpful. Maybe that's one of the reasons Blizzard only allows Evokers for Dracthyrs. Dracthyr, therefore high A tier pick for me, would be rated higher if Dracthyr could be other classes, especially melee. Last but not least, Bloodelfs. With at least 5 different enemy beneficial effects across almost all dungeons, such as increasing damage and haste by 25%, decreasing damage taken by 75%, or a big shield, Bloodelf's Arcane Torrent looks like the strongest racial ability as of now. The removal effect is beneficial in almost every Dragonflight Season 1 dungeon, even better for classes that can't do that on their own like Paladins or Warriors, will have the ability to do so with rolling Bloodelf. It's also nice for all the classes that can already remove beneficial effects to have another one to be able to remove 2 effects with 2 globals. Although you might argue that rolling Tauren in that case might be better. So, in conclusion, the Blood Elf ratio will be extremely beneficial in the new Dragonflight Season 1 dungeons, although that ratio was not really helpful in the previous seasons. Combining these new power ratings of ratios with the new discount on buying 3 or even 6 faction changes, you almost have to be careful to not become a conspiracy theorist. What a turn of events, at least it's not on purpose, right? Well, anyway. You don't choose the min-max life, the min-max life chooses you.